Today I'm joined with Eric Adrian Lazcano, MD, a 29-year-old physician and psychiatrist who recently moved to LA after completing his psychiatric residency training in Chicago at Advocate Lutheran General Hospital. Eric graduated medical school from UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas, a research-heavy institution and top 20 medical school in the country, home to 5 Nobel laureates. Coincidentally, UT Southwestern Medical Center is also home to the #1 ranked integrated plastic surgery residency program in the country. Now, as an attending in psychiatry, Eric plans to spearhead a new class of mental health professional. This month he is starting a new chapter in his life as he is taking over a well-established solo private practice in South Bay, LA. While Eric feels he won the lottery with his private practice, he claims that just 4 years ago he was in a completely different boat. So I just wanted to talk about how we linked up because I think it's a pretty good story. So basically, you were staying in our guest studio because my parents are renting out an Airbnb, and I had just came back from college. It had been about like a month, I think, that I'd been back in LA, and it was pretty funny because one morning my dad comes over to me and he was like, the Airbnb guest. He was like, the Airbnb guest. And he had like a bewildered look on his face. It was pretty funny, dude. And he's like, the Airbnb guest is meditating in our backyard. And I was like, oh really? Like kind of like no emotion, but then I was like, that's cool. And I was like, in my head I was like, I gotta meet this guy because, you know, who the hell just meditates in the backyard, you know? So anyway, I think it was the next day we were having a little get together at our house, and I think this was like during the World Cup or something. I think I had a soccer ball with my friend Andy, and then I saw you pull in to the side of the street, and I'm just like, hey dude,
Yeah.
you want to play some soccer? And I remember your face at the time. You were just like, yeah. And I think like within 60 seconds you were talking about how like mindfulness is like the most I think you said something like mindfulness is like one of the most underrated tools that we have.
Right.
And I think I brought up like Eckhart Tolle like right then and there. You weren't familiar with him, I don't think, at the time.
Right.
But I mean, yeah, I think that just kind of spawned a whole, I mean, it basically spawned this moment right here, right now.
Right.
And yeah, I think July 4th was like that following Wednesday, and we spent the whole day together, and our conversations went pretty in depth, and that's when I kind of had the idea to do this, what we're doing right now. So I'm glad that you're here and we're actually doing it, and all kind of came together. I mean, I know we had a lot of stuff to go through to get to this point, but
Right.
you're here now. So do you want to just go into basically just your story, how you got here at this moment right now, and how you got into your field, your profession? Just tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Shaheen, I just want to say thank you very much for that introduction, and I want to just take a moment to acknowledge an intention of gratitude for this moment, because as you just stated, there are a lot of factors that have come together for this moment to manifest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's important that we acknowledge that, because a lot of the times that can get lost in our day-to-day shuffle.
Mm-hmm.
So now, as you mentioned, I am about to take over a well-established solo private practice in psychiatry later this month. Just 4 years ago, I was on a completely different trajectory. I actually, beginning junior year of college, had convinced myself that I wanted to be a plastic surgeon, and had gone into medical school with that intention, and did all of the things that I thought were what I needed to do to eventually get that goal in the future. And did the research. I networked with the people in the field, and spent time in the operating room. Got to my 4th year of medical school doing what we call away rotations. These are rotations where you basically go into a program and you sort of see what they're like. And it was during that time I was rotated through UT Southwestern, University of Wisconsin-Madison, Pittsburgh, Georgetown. These are top plastic surgery programs in the country, and it was then that I realized plastic surgery really wasn't even what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that was a really sobering realization, actually, because I had been so narrow-minded, so tunnel-visioned into this idea, and had built it up in my mind to be this sort of conception. And when that conceptualization was not actually coming to realization, that was a really turning point in my life. So how did I get there? So the best story is told chronologically.
Yeah.
So we'll backtrack, and I would love to give you a 2-sentence spiel about why I chose psychiatry, but really the story is a lot more in depth, and I have to really get into the nitty-gritty, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay. So a miracle took place at my inception. I was born with something called microtia. Microtia is made up of 2 words, micro, little. Otia comes from OT, ear, and like otolaryngology. And basically what it is the underdevelopment or complete lack of development of an external ear, and oftentimes accompanied by a lack of development of the middle ear. So at the age of 6, while I was in kindergarten, I went back and forth to this state, actually, California, in Woodside, which is a suburb of San Francisco. Why is that important? Well, it was home to Dr. Burt Brent. Dr. Burt Brent is now retired, but he was a pioneer in ear reconstruction and plastic surgery in the 1980s. There isn't a book in plastic surgery that doesn't mention him under the topic of ear reconstruction. So it was a 3-stage plastic surgery series of procedures that I went through. What you see on the right side of my skull base here is actually cartilage from my rib cage. It was actually taken from my left rib cage, and so I went through that series of procedures very early on, and then in adolescence went through a middle ear reconstruction with a physician, surgeon, Dr. Robert Jarsdorfer, who's now deceased, but also a pioneer in ENT, in the field of ENT surgery. And having had these procedures and being a plastic surgery patient, no doubt changed my life. I got towards more of a sense of normalcy. I was able to have a lot of the hearing deficit from not having a middle ear canal on the right side sort of restored. And with this also came, it wasn't all rainbows and unicorns, we'll say.
Yeah.
Because having had all of these experiences, I was also sort of entrenched in 2 fundamental problems.
Okay.
One, unsatisfactoriness. That is the dukkha. I didn't have a completely identical set of ears. I didn't have 100% of hearing that I thought a quote-unquote normal person would have. Okay. And the second problem, fundamental problem that I had, was an identification with a self, an identification with this set of experiences, and all of what that entailed, right? This there's these mental formations that I sort of generated. That is, when I say mental formations, I mean these cognitions, these thoughts that I had about myself, about the world, and so those were my two fundamental problems. And not only that, the story gets better. So with the chest wall surgeries that I had, what actually ended up happening, and I'm telling you this now, having realized this only through a lot of introspection, what happened was, because of that acquired change in my chest wall, there was a lot of body shame, and there was a lot of weight gain, because that is what I felt at the time would sort of cover up the change in the appearance of the chest wall. And so I spent a lot of my time in my teens unhappy, chronically dissatisfied with the way I looked, sort of dealing with the karmic consequences of having made poor lifestyle choices, that is, eating poorly, not exercising well enough. And this sort of built up to the time when I was graduating high school. And I spent my college years sort of changing my diet regimen, changing my workout routine, changing the cardiovascular training I was doing, to try and get to really the crux of the issue, which is how do we burn body fat? What is the key to the non-surgical key to body fat reduction? And when I entered medical school, there was a lot of, again, dissatisfaction with myself, with my circumstances, because I hadn't found that answer. And then on top of that, I was future fantasizing. I was in this mindset that I was going to be a plastic surgeon, and that somehow that was going to somehow undo or make right all of the wrongs that I felt were a problem in my life.
Okay.
And basically, I got to the end of medical school and just realized that I was living in a completely different reality. And to make peace with my mind, because if it wasn't plastic surgery, I didn't know what it was going to be. That's all that I thought that there was, but it wasn't. So what I ended up doing was committing to a 1-year surgical subspecialty intern year at another hospital in Kentucky. And it wasn't until the very end of that intern year and residency that it came to me, the notion that why not psychiatry? And when I say psychiatry, I mean more of why not be a physician of the mind, right? Because I have all these experiences that have helped me throughout my life to sort of cultivate an understanding of these sorts of elements that are less related to the body, more related to the mind. And here's the specialty where I can utilize that and also utilize medications to help people achieve the best versions of themselves. And that's really when I had a sort of, there was like an opening. It's like I was no longer swimming against a current. I had been swimming upstream against, in a river that I thought was the direction I needed to go. I needed to go upstream on that river, and all it took was a letting go of that idea of being in surgery at all. Imagining the possibility that there could be another reality, another possibility outside of what I thought in my mind was the only possibility. Right? This sort of detrimental all or nothing thinking that a lot of the times can be a big problem in people's lives. And so then I basically used that intern year in surgery as credit for my psychiatric residency. Apparently you can, the board of psychiatry and neurology thought it was okay that, or granted me permission to have my intern year in surgery transfer over to an intern year in psychiatry. So I didn't have to redo that year, and all I did was look for positions in a psychiatric residency for a second year level position. There were 2 positions, one in Chicago and one in California, and I thought eventually I would end up in California anyway, so I chose the one in Chicago, also because I liked the vibes from my interview and my time sort of getting to know the program.
Okay.
Transitioning from a first-year surgery resident to a second-year psychiatry resident in a different state was just the beginning. As it turns out, within that first year, I was introduced to the idea of mindfulness and the principles of what it entails after being having gone to a coffee shop and noticing a flyer in the back for an 8-week mindfulness meditation class. And through that experience, that did two things for me outside of residency. One, it helped me develop a daily meditation practice that I hadn't established prior to starting the psychiatric residency. Two, it helped me come to understand that what mindfulness is, how it's directly applicable to everyone's life, to my life, and how I could sort of self-teach myself the sort of the deeper layers of where mindfulness stems from, which is Buddhism. Not everyone knows that, and not everyone may want to accept that, but as it turns out, one cannot have a fundamental understanding of mindfulness without having a fundamental understanding of Buddhism. Okay, now that's a label, and it's risky using that label, but that's sort of how we have to communicate with conventional reality, right?
Yeah. How does mindfulness play into our lives and reaching kind of state of tranquility?
Yeah. That's a great question. And the problem is that we only know as much as we know, right? Our gnosis is really the rate limiting factor. So we might feel we know what mindfulness is, and that might be the hindrance to helping us develop mindfulness, right? So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is awareness of present experience with full attention, with acceptance, and without judgment, okay? And really, there are different pillars of mindfulness. It's not just being aware of what's going around, you know, what situation I'm in. So there's actually 4 pillars of mindfulness. One, there is mindfulness of body. There is 2, mindfulness of feeling. That is, every situation one is in, is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? One of those 3 things. So not feeling in the sense of what sort of thoughts I'm having right now.
Yeah.
Right. 3, the third one is mind, mental formations.
Yeah.
What thoughts am I having, right? The thought stream that's flowing. And 4 is one way to look at the 4th establishment is giving it the label Dhamma or Dharma.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's it's mind, objects of mind, or categories of experience. So if I were to say that this filming is Dharma or Dhamma, it's a learning experience. Or if I were to say I'm meditating now and I'm going to have 3 objects of mind, the in-breath, the out-breath, and the fact that I'm sitting, that would also be Dharma. It's kind of, it's a complex definition to give to that 4th establishment. It's really not important. I don't want to get too caught up in discussing it, but really, so we can use the tools of mindfulness in what's happening in every second of our lives and realize that there's a lot we're missing. Okay, there's a lot we're sort of sleepwalking through that we don't even realize is happening. Okay, and because we only know what we know, a lot of the times we have no clue.
Yeah.
Okay, and I like making references to movies. So the one I have is to The Matrix, right? So we're all sort of plugged in to automaticity, to doing things in ritualistic manner, and having patterns, right? Mental patterns, physical patterns, habits that we go through in our day-to-day routine, right? So the way I would sort of conceptualize mindfulness is if someone were to have a camera, and to have a camera on what one was processing as well as doing from the moment that alarm clock goes off to the moment one is actually not conscious anymore, that is in sleep. What would actually happen? What would we actually capture? Right? That's how that's a more applicable way to really understand mindfulness.
Yeah. So I just want to talk about like a personal experience because I know you kind of took the path of reaching that state of tranquility through, Buddhist teachings and Siddhartha Gautama. But for me, I never had any of that exposure. That's why I think it's so interesting for you and me to link up, because we kind of had two different access points into it. And for me, I spoke to you about it. It was Eckhart Tolle, where
Right.
I found him at a point in my life where, I started questioning things a lot. I think just how people and society runs. Like I was in, I think, my first year of college, and I think I saw a video. Yeah, I saw a YouTube video of Eckhart Tolle, and I actually sent you the link. I remember it was like one where he's talking to the guy.
Right. Right.
And he starts. I wouldn't have believed in like any of this stuff. Like this, like Siddhartha Gautama and any of this stuff, and spirituality. I always kind of thought it was like weird, like voodoo or something like that, because I just had no direct experience with what's actually underneath all, you could say, all the dirt or all the garbage. There's actually something profound underneath any religion. If you look at any religion, any spiritual practice, all these things, they've kind of just been muddled up. But really, when you look deeper into it, it doesn't matter what path you take to it. Like you said before, everything's just a signpost pointing to the same thing.
Right.
Doesn't matter which path you take. Everyone has to each their own, but it all points to the same thing. So for me, Eckhart Tolle, he was really good at making this stuff just seem so practical, in the sense that he did a really good job at asking questions. So one question that he would ask is, who are you in your absolute state? Like, who are you? What has never changed about you from your birth to your current state right now? Like, what has stayed exactly the same? And I remember that was kind of the thing I started thinking about, and I said, well, what would it be? How would people answer that question? What does stay the same about you as a human being through the entirety of your life? And he said, well, is it your body? Is it your body that stays the same? Well, no, because your body's always regenerating. There's always new cells being killed off and new ones forming, so it can't be your body. Every 10 years you have a completely new body.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, so it's not the body. And then he said, is it the thoughts that go through your head? And obviously it can't be your thoughts, because we have like 60,000 thoughts a day, right? So your thoughts are always changing. There's always just this stream of thoughts that are continuously going through your consciousness, through yourself. So couldn't be your thoughts. He said, is it your feelings? Is it your emotions? But obviously it's not that either, because your feelings and emotions change day to day. So I was kind of just there sitting watching the video, and I was like, well, what is it? And finally he says, it's your awareness. It's the fact that you're conscious. That's what stays the same. That's the underlying factor, variable of your life that always stays or remains the same. Just the fact that you're conscious. And to say you're conscious is synonymous with saying you are the present moment. You are the space of this moment. Past and future, that's psychological. That takes form in thoughts. You can think about the past, but you're thinking about the past in the space of this moment.
Right.
And you could think about the future, but you're thinking about the future in the space of this moment. So when you really look down to it, it's really just the space of this moment that always stays the same. There's all these things changing, all these forms changing, all these thoughts changing, your body's changing, your emotions, your feelings, the world, nature, it's always changing. But when you look deeper within what's actually happening, there's a space underlying all change and all forms that always remains constant and always remains the same.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was basically what opened up that rabbit hole. I remember that day, it just clicked, and my life has never been the same. But yeah, maybe you can share your experience.
You bring up a great point, which the line you used was that there's a constant underlying reality amidst the sea of change. And I want to tie that in to a timeline in history that was before the time of the Buddha. Buddha was 600 BC, but really, if we chase to 3000 BC, there was a civilization called the Indus Valley civilization, and why they're important. They were on par with the pyramid builders of the Nile. They had well-formed civilizations. They had may have even utilized the decimal system. But really, what's most striking is they have records of sort of the god of yoga at the time. So it's thought that if meditation was practiced at the time, that it would imply that the same principles that they used sort of externally to create their society and etc., they also applied to the study of the mind, right?
Yeah.
Brahma Vidya they called it, and so it was the supreme science. And the rishis, the seers of India, basically they wanted to analyze the human experience of this civilization and see if there's anything fundamental that could be consistent amongst all of the what they basically had documented. And so the three statements that encapsulize their understanding of human awareness are as follows. This is known as the Perennial Philosophy, coined by Aldous Huxley. Okay, 1, that there's an infinite, changeless reality beneath the sea of change. 2, that this infinite, changeless reality is already present within every human being. And 3, that the point of human existence is to discover this reality. Or said another way, the point of this existence is to find God.
Yeah.
Or said another way, it could be the point of this life is to reach nibbana, right? Or to reach pure consciousness. You can define it in an infinite number of ways. It's not important because it's just a label. But why are these 3 important? Because they tie into sort of what you've already discovered through your own direct experiences. Is the infinite, changeless truth beneath the sea of change. The statement number 2 I want to spend a little time on, because it also goes in line with Siddhartha's teachings, which one of his most profound realizations when he became fully enlightened under the Bodhi tree was that all human beings have the potential to fully awaken, and very few realize this truth, and very few will realize it in the entire span of their existence, right? So because of this, the Buddha was sort of moved to help awaken those who were already at a certain level, right? His goal was to help awaken anyone who he interacted with.
Yeah.
So that is why the second statement in that Perennial Philosophy ties into the Buddhist teachings. Okay. Point number 3, I want to spend a little time on, because it helps it helps correct a wrong view that I had in my sort of conceptualization of what God is and what heaven is, right? The whole Western way of thinking is in line with the future fantasy, right? That God is somewhere outside of the now.
Somewhere up there.
Right? Somewhere up there, down there, whatever.
You have to imagine it, though. You have to imagine God.
Right. There's a lot of imagination.
Yeah.
And that heaven, which you also have to imagine, is also somewhere in the future.
Yeah.
Right? That heaven is anywhere besides now.
Besides now.
Right?
Now is just a means to get to heaven.
Right. Yeah. And that is the irony, that in the moment that we least expect it to be applicable, it's most applicable. Right?
Yeah.
The now.
Yeah.
The present moment.
The irony. Yeah, that's a huge point. I mean, so could we say that's the fundamental issue with most, I guess you could say, religious teachings and stuff, is that we view, and especially in the West, we view this moment as a means to an end, without realizing that this moment is everything. This
Right.
the space of this now is everything.
Right, that's absolutely it. That a lot of spiritual religious teachings it's not to say it's a guarantee that that's going to happen, that you're going to live in the future, but they predispose one to doing that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So if we see in all religions or spiritual teachings as mountain peaks, right, aligned along a mountain range, they all look at the moon, right?
Yeah.
So if you stand on any mountain peak, they're going to help you get a more clear view of the moon. And it doesn't matter which mountain peak you stand on. And you could spend your entire life comparing the mountain peaks and how they're similar and how they're different.
Yeah.
But you're still missing you would still miss the fundamental beauty of what's actually happening, which is the view of the moon. So, and that's what makes the Buddhist teachings different, in that it's a mountain peak that you can stand on, one can stand on, and test everything in the teachings for themselves, right? The applicability, the direct experience, the direct applicability to one's life, right? And see for oneself that it's true, right? See that these things are actually true. See that this is actually going on in the mind. See that this is actually going on in the body. Rid ourselves of the shroud of delusion, right? And with that comes clarity of mind. So then you can take that discerning eye of wisdom and apply it to any religious teaching out there and validate for yourself, is this really in line, congruent with what I know, with what I know is true based off of my own direct experience. We have to be sort of like investigators with mindfulness is essentially what it takes. And really it takes takes in a sense, because you have to sort of work in the lab, right? To really study yourself.
Do it for yourself.
What is going on in a day-to-day, moment by moment, second by second process in the mind, in the body, in the feeling state, right? Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, like bringing it down to earth for people who are watching this. Like, maybe a lot of people, if you don't have that, if you've never come into contact with that changes underlying reality, that awareness that precedes your experience in your life, if you've never come into contact with that consciously, it can lead to a lot of problems, because you're identified with this self-image, which is a form. It's an ego. And when you're so identified with that ego, with that self-image of you, I could say the self-image of me, I'm Shaheen Manjezi, I was born in California, and there's all these attachments to this self-image. And that self-image doesn't remain constant. That self-image is always changing. Right. And you'll find that our society is set up to enhance that self-image and protect that self-image, no matter what the means is.
Right.
So for a lot of people, the traditional route would be, go get a job, even if you're not happy doing it, go get a job that you don't like doing, but chase money. If you get enough money, then maybe you'll be happy in the future. If you in the future, in the future, right. And it's just this cycle that never ends. It's like, maybe you can get a spouse or a partner, and they'll make you happy. So you find a lot of people in these relationships that just tend to not work out, because they expect the other person to bring about the happiness, but they don't look within themselves to provide their own happiness. Right. So it's, again, this just end of the cycle, and it all has to do with being so closely identified with this self-image that we all carry. Right. And if we don't find a means to kind of not distancing, but being aware of that self-image and transcending that self-image, then we're always going to be controlled with it, and we're always going to be in a state of suffering, because we're always going to be clinging and protecting it, and just, it just doesn't doesn't work out.
So the reason why this happens, these phenomena happen, is because the pathophysiology is that the mind does not like unfamiliarity. The mind does not like uncharted territory. So it goes to, and if it doesn't know the answer, it doesn't like not knowing the answer. Right? So the mind would rather say, this is actually the outline, this is the rubric to get you to point B, right? If you're at point A, this is all I know, so this is how it is. And it can be scary to chart through uncharted waters. Right? It can be very so again, it takes a lot of courage to sort of discover, to have these discoveries that one can have in their own lives, to really look directly at what is going on in the day-to-day processes, the patterns of the mind and the patterns of the rituals that we do from a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So a question a lot of the viewers might be asking is, well, how do I cultivate this sense of inner peace, right? How do I rid myself of this suffering? How do I sort of get to this state, right? But it's risky to sort of have this sort of all or nothing thinking, right? It's either I'm in complete suffering or I'm in complete happiness. How do I become content, right? We may not be asking ourselves the right questions, right? Because the idea is to really, well, let's think about it. If the answer to our problems was a quick fix, if it was possible to communicate the answer to one's problems in a sentence or two sentences, then how much would that be worth? Right? The reason why not many people have the answer to a question like, how do I find inner peace, is because it's very hard to attain. Right? And so we have to have compassion for ourselves. We have to be willing and open to say it's okay that I'm not at inner peace right now in this moment in time. Right? It's okay for that to be the case. And to have but on the flip side, we have to also not be too lax, and we have to say, what am I doing in this moment now to get to where I want to be? So it's important to have both of those aspects, right? We can't have the passivity. We can't just take the back seat and say, I'm fine with whatever's happening right now. Wherever I'm at in 5 years, 5 days from now, 5 weeks from now, 5 years from now is fine with me. Right? We have to be in the driver's seat. If we're going through a rough patch or a dirt road, or there's a lot of unstable pavement, we have to be willing to sort of ride it out. We have to be willing to say, how can I use what's happening right now in this very moment and apply it to what will happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And that's really the key. The key is progress over perfection. The truth is that I can't give you can't give anyone the answer to their problems in a sentence or two sentences. And that's what makes so the reality, another truth, is that anything worth having in this life, it can't be found with shortcuts. There are no shortcuts to anything worth having, right? Inner peace, tranquility of mind, is something that takes cultivation.
Something you have to work at.
Yeah, exactly. It takes lots and lots of consistent work, like going to the gym, right? Yeah. This is how I'm going to tie in a big pitfall that a lot of people have in Western society, is how do I get the body, the physique that I'm looking for, right? Tell me the quick fix, tell me the pill that I can take, tell me the diet I need to be on, and what's the solution to sort of get over this hump, right? How do I rid myself of this body fat composition without doing any leg work, right? That's not the reality, right? We can sort of we can get liposuction, we can go to the OR and have that procedure done, but it really wouldn't be getting to the crux of the issue, right? The crux of the issue is that we need to look at our day-to-day patterns, our rituals, our habits, and see really what's going on here. Am I eating the right foods for these conditions to manifest and for the right physique to present itself? Am I doing the right activities for that to happen? Am I getting the right sleep, the right rest and recovery for the body? Am I resting my mind? Am I meditating on a day-to-day basis? Am I sort of allowing, am I giving my mind a break from the hustle and bustle, from the multitasking, right? From doing 3 things at once, right? We brag about how many things we can do at once. Nobody brags about single tasking, right? Of just doing one thing at a time, right? And nobody brags about non-doing.
Yeah.
Right? And that's essentially what meditation is. Whereas exercise is sort of as we conceptualize it, like lifting weights or doing some sort of cardiovascular training on the elliptical, meditation is non-doing. It's basically being present with what is, and taking a third-person perspective to what is happening internally.
So a good question would be, is spirituality or self-realization, whatever you want to call it, about adding layers onto you until you reach a point where you say, oh, I'm self-realized? Or is it about stripping away layers until you find what's already been there the entire time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to tie that into something Tolle says in the beginning of Power Now, where he basically says that there are a lot of beggars in the world, right? People who have their hand out, they're looking for something externally, and little do they know they are sitting on top of a wooden crate of pure gold. And that's really the truth, right? That we inherently already have all of the conditions for peace that we need in this human existence. The tragic part is that not that many people know this, right? And the reason why is something is basically something you touched on, which is the layering, right? We layer ourselves with this sense of self, with these forms of protection throughout our lives, right? Compare a child to an adult. How are they similar? How are they different, right? Childhood is one of the ways a child differs from an adult is a child doesn't have these layers of this unnecessary added complexity. Children have a lot less of a struggle living in the present moment. So how can this video be applicable to the viewers? Think back to when you were a child. How does what you're doing now compare to what you were doing in your younger years as a human? So to get back to the question you asked, my thought is that the purpose of becoming more conscious is to strip away these layers, realize that we have already inherent within us the good, the beautiful, and the true.
And I think that's basically this whole thing that we're talking about is you're already complete, you're already whole, you're already pure, you're already perfect, but it's just whether you realize that or not, and it's how are you going to realize that. That's really what it's all about. But I also want to get back into just those distractions in the modern world and what kind of keeps us from realizing that within ourselves we're all perfect already, we're all good, and it's all on us basically to create the world that we want to live in, instead of looking outside of ourselves and saying, is the government going to create the world I want to live in? Are these institutions going to create the world? Are other people? Are my family members? Is my spouse going to create it? But actually taking full responsibility for yourself by looking deep within yourself and saying, I have the power, and I'm in control, I'm in the driver's seat to create the world and manifest the world I want to live in. But some of these distractions that I mentioned are like social media, our society is just designed for us to keep looking outside of ourselves. So just sitting people in front of a television and just watching TV, always trying to sell people stuff, fast food, all these things, always just looking outside. What's going on with the celebrities? What's going on with so-and-so's social media? And it's just always this you can look at anyone, you go on the bus, you go on the train, you can see people just looking down at their phone, just completely consumed, looking outwardly. But there's some people who go through their whole day, which is crazy to me, without just sitting down and just looking deep within themselves and finding that place of calm, finding that place of that changes reality that we're speaking of. They don't do that, and it's just mind-boggling to me. But that's the reality of it. That's the truth. And I think as long as you're looking out into the world to make you happy, you're looking externally for your job, or you're looking for money or your spouse or whatever to complete you, you'll never be satisfied. It's not until you realize that you're already whole and complete, and that you're the one who creates the reality that you desire, that you actually really do achieve true peace and happiness and tranquility.
Yeah. Now, yeah, so I want to make a distinction between happiness and peace, which is actually, it's subtle, but really easy to miss. So happiness is actually the opposite of suffering, and both conditions are unsatisfactory because they are impermanent, subject to change, and not self. Okay, these are three core principles of Buddhist teachings. But peace is something that we can have innately without the external conditions. Right? Happiness is sort of this phenomenon that manifests. Peace is sort of like more of innately cultivated, right? Let me ask you a question. If one were on their deathbed, dying of metastatic pancreatic cancer, do you think that person would be happy?
No, probably not.
Right. Yeah, probably not. Now, do you think it would be possible for that person to be at peace?
If they were to reach a full acceptance of the moment, then yes.
Right. So that's how happiness and peace are different. I just want to make that distinction.
So I think we should go over the kind of traps that people might get into when we're talking about this stuff.
Right.
And just a quick little story about my personal experience with a common trap was when I was in college and I found out about this stuff. I got my relationship with my mind was so profound to the point where if the thoughts were still there, so there was still the thought of, how we get these negative thoughts that have just been conditioned into us as, Shaheen, you're a loser, or you should be better, you should do better. Those thoughts would still go through my head, but now I could laugh at those thoughts because I had transcended them. I realized that my identity was beyond those thoughts, and I think that's everything. I think most people they hear that thought and they believe it. They're identified with it.
Right.
And that's when suffering incurs and ensues. But basically, I'd reached this level where it wasn't about controlling the thoughts. It was about the relationship to the thoughts. And now my relationship with the thoughts was friendly. I could laugh at the thoughts. They didn't control me. The saying is, the mind makes a good servant. It doesn't make a good master, right?
You bring up a great point, right? Which is that we can get caught up in our thoughts very easily, right? But we have to understand, if we just change our perspective and realize that the function of the mind is to produce thoughts, then we can sort of have more of a sense of acceptance, right? The function of the heart is to pump blood. The function of the lungs is to get oxygen to the rest of your body, right? The function of your mind is to generate thoughts. That's what it's supposed to do, right? And so the tie-in to applicability is that there's a reason for each. We tie it back to cause and effects, right? If these thoughts are generated at the concentration, at the density that they are being generated at, there's a reason for it, right?
Yeah.
The concentration of these negative thoughts didn't just exist in isolation. It wasn't just this cross-section in time and that's all that existed, right? This moment was conditioned, and it had variables that went into its creation, and that as we cultivate mindfulness, we become more attuned to what those variables are, to why we get into these negative thought patterns. And so what that does, so when we really look at these thoughts and de-identify, that's really the first step. Or really, the first step would be to realize that they're happening, that these thoughts are occurring. Sometimes we're on automatic pilot. Right? And by de-identifying, we have the ability to better be in control, to better be in the driver's seat on a day-to-day basis, right? To not be so consumed with what's going on inside, right? In the mind.
Yeah. So even so, just me saying that, even I was at that point, I could laugh at the thoughts and all that. Even to this day, there's still times where I find myself, if that thought were to come up, a hurtful thought, there is a time where I'll believe that thought, I'll be consumed by that thought, and it will produce something negative within me, a sensation that's negative.
Mm-hmm.
And that negative sensation is actually the signal for me that I am clinging to the thoughts. So it's one of those things that suffering actually serves as kind of like an alarm, or kind of just like a feedback mechanism for us as human beings.
Right, absolutely, right.
To open yourself up and stop clinging and let it go and accept it, and it works as that way. So suffering can actually be our greatest tool.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think
exactly.
about that?
I think that's absolutely right. Insofar as there's clinging, grasping, or attachment, there will be suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But if we are suffering, we can use that suffering, we can utilize it to transform the mud into the lotus, right?
Mm-hmm.
The suffering and the happiness inter-are. They cannot be separated.
Mm-hmm.
You can't separate the left and the right. They inter-are. They exist because they're dependent on each other, right? So here in the West, we have this idea that we have to eradicate something and only have the other side, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we can that we have to be in a good mood all the time, right? That there's no opposite. It doesn't work like that. That's not how polarities work. Right? Female, male, the polarities exist for a reason.
Yeah.
And the idea, the skill set is to be aware that that the suffering is there, and to ask the question, how can I turn this into something beautiful? Right? How can I work with this? How can I work with this mold of clay and turn it into something aesthetically pleasing? Right? I'm speaking in a literal sense, but I'm referring in a figurative sense. And that answer will vary depending on the individual.
Yeah. So let's just take it down to finish. Just something you could do on a daily basis. I think it all comes down to awareness. So when that negative pattern arises, all you really need is the awareness of that negative pattern, and that will actually help you to transcend that negative pattern.
Right. Awareness is the first step, and then it's what am I going to do with that awareness, right? In the book Power of Now, Tolle kind of chips away at this wrong view of the co-author, who I believe is taking something out of another author's book, the concept of radical acceptance, right? If we just accept things, then that's all we need to do. It's not all we need to do. We need to be aware of what's happening. We can accept what's happening in this moment, but what are we going to do to use that discomfort, the dis-ease, to change or alter our future path? Right? That's the key. Is how can I use what's happening? I don't want to anesthetize myself with what's happening now, and with TV, with food, with alcohol, with drugs. I don't want to anesthetize myself. How do I accept what's happening right now and transform it into something that is rewarding and something that can serve as a sense of satisfaction for myself? And if that answer is not clear, then it's baby steps, right? Again, progress over perfection. A lot of the times it's not clear. What do I need to do with this experience, with what's happening to me in the now, right? But being aware of it is the first step, and then but to tie back into how do we tie this back to a day-to-day applicability? Is practice being more aware, right? Using the second pillar of mindfulness, right? Is what I'm experiencing right now pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? It's got to be one of those three. We'll just keep it real simple. That's one. That's one aspect we can that's one tool we can utilize. Another tool of mindfulness we can utilize is practicing having gratitude for ourselves with what's happening right now, right? As long as we're breathing, there's more right with us than wrong with us, right? So we often oversee the inherent beauty with what's happening in the now, right? If we don't have a headache, then appreciate what it feels like to have non-headache, right? If we have a headache, appreciate what it's like to have a non-sore throat, right? If we have a sore throat, appreciate what it's like to not have chest pain, right? If we have congestive heart failure, appreciate what it's like to have limbs that walk. Right? If we don't have that, right, we can go on and on. And so just being able to acknowledge that there are factors right here in the now that I'm experiencing that I can be thankful for.
Yeah.
That don't exist outside of me. That I can be thankful for them right here, right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's about it. So, yeah.